Caseus, Jedi Master. Chapter 11. The sky was a dull gray in the late morning as Caseus and Liara sat in meditation. As they did, Liara's face twisted into a grimace. Caseus could sense her unease and opened his eyes to face her. "What's wrong?"
"I feel something."
"What do you mean?"
"Something feels bad. Like danger."
Caseus closed his eyes. He could feel it. The past few days or so, he'd also been plagued by feelings of danger. He just didn't know what the source was. Now that Liara was sensing it too, it had to be close. "I think we should pack our gear and find a new spot."
"You think someone's found us?"
"I don't know. But I don't like this feeling. Start packing the camp. I'm going to get the ship ready." Liara nodded and began to grab the training equipment, cooking pots, and anything else left out as Caseus went inside. The feeling of impending danger was getting worse. Whatever, or whoever he was sensing was coming. And they weren't going to be there when it arrived. Caseus had just finished making preparations when he heard something.
"Master, there's a ship."
Caseus' stomach turned as he went outside and saw an incoming craft, a fire spray model, heavily armed. "Liara, stay back. Get in the ship."
"Caseus..."
"Do it. Now." Liara ran inside the ship and stayed out of sight as Caseus watched the ship land on the beach. This didn't look good at all. Anyone flying a ship this fortified was prepared for trouble. The ramp opened, and out stepped Boba Fett and Dengar, weapons at the ready. Caseus kept his composure as they came closer. "Can I help you?"
"You can make it easy on yourself and come quietly."
"I'm sorry, I'm not sure what this is about."
"You think dragging this out will make things any easier for you, Jedi?"
"I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a traveler." Faster than he could blink, Boba shot out a cable wire from his wrist gauntlet at Caseus, who was ensnared in the thick metal line. As he struggled, Boba walked forward and rummaged under Caseus' cloak, removing his lightsaber.
"Just a traveler, eh? Where's the other one?"
Caseus grimaced and stayed quiet. Suddenly, his lightsaber was pulled from Boba's grip and into the waiting hand of Liara. "I'm here."
"Speak of the devil."
"Liara, no!"
"Two Jedi. Looks like your source is credible, Dengar."
"This is better than credible. This is a jackpot."
"You're not taking us anywhere."
"Is that so?"
Boba shot out another cable wire which Liara swiftly evaded. Just as Dengar aimed his weapon, Caseus pulled his saber to his hand and cut himself free, holding out his weapon. Boba aimed his gauntlet at Caseus, sending a stream of fire towards him as he leapt back, his tunic smoldering.
"The hard way it is."
"Liara, run!" Liara quickly turned and ran as Boba activated his jetpack and flew towards her, only for Caseus to pull him back with the force, sending him to the dirt. He stood immediately and fired several shots along with Dengar as the Jedi swiftly deflected them.
"Dengar, get the girl."
Caseus tried to attack Dengar, but was swiftly tackled by Boba, using his jetpack to gain the advantage. Dengar immediately ran after Liara, who was hightailing it towards the trees. Caseus tussled with the Mandalorian before shoving him off, attempting to strike him down, but Boba was quicker and flew into the air, firing at Caseus from above as he swatted each shot away.
"Try this on for size."
Boba aimed his gauntlet as several small rockets flew from his wrists. Caseus' eyes filled with fear as he leapt backwards. The rockets hit the sand, the impact sending Caseus flying backwards in a dazed heap. Boba flew over his head again and fired more blasts from his carbine rifle. Caseus barely had enough time to deflect them back as his eyes watered from the dirt thrown into his face. He couldn't handle this bounty hunter in the air. He had to get rid of that jetpack. As Boba swooped in low, firing relentlessly, Caseus called upon the Force and sent several large rocks from the beach, hurtling towards him. Boba swiftly evaded them but was caught off guard when Caseus threw his saber into the air towards the bounty hunter. Boba tried to fly backwards, but the saber sliced through the back of his jetpack, causing it to sputter and send him careening painfully to the ground. As Caseus called his weapon back to his hand, Boba stood slowly and cracked his neck before turning to his prey.
Bad move, Jedi.
Caseus rushed at Boba and swung wildly, but he soon realized Boba was far more skilled than he imagined. Fett rolled out of the way of his strikes before landing a stiff punch to Caseus, grabbing his weapon hand and twisting it, causing Caseus to drop his saber. Before Caseus could reclaim his lightsaber, Boba aimed his gauntlet again and fired several small toxic saber darts towards him. Caseus evaded a few, one embedded into his mechanical hand. Before he could fire any more, Caseus pushed Boba back with the force and called his saber to his hand. It had nearly reached his hand before Boba shot at it, hitting it and damaging the weapon. Caseus tried to activate the blade, but only sparks flew from the emitter as Boba aimed his rifle. Caseus quickly dove behind a rock as plasma bolts skidded by his ears. As Boba ran forward, Caseus sent the rock flying straight at him, catching him off guard and knocking him to the ground, sending his rifle flying into the nearby water. Boba stood and blocked a punch from Caseus, the two foes now engaged in hand-to-hand combat. Meanwhile, Liara ran as fast as she could and hid behind a tall tree, catching her breath. She could sense Dengar not too far away as he whistled to her, almost like he would to a dog. Liara's heart beat fast and her mind raced, trying to think of what to do. Closing her eyes, she tried to focus, letting the force guide her. It told her to keep going straight. As she ran forward, a blaster shot whizzed by her head as Dengar stood, aiming carefully at her. Liara dashed from side to side, evading the shots as Dengar pursued her. Soon, Liara had cleared the tree line and was on the other side of the island, surrounded by water and tall rock formations. Looking over the rocks, she saw a cave and ran inside. Dengar soon arrived, breathing heavily, and looked around. It wasn't long before he too spotted the cave and smirked as he walked over.
Come on out, girl.
He heard no response as he spat on the dirt and went into the cave, looking around for her. Liara hid deep in the cave as she heard Dengar's footsteps. Peeking around the corner, she saw him snooping around the large rocks looking for her. Suddenly, she remembered her last duel with Caseus, and she had an idea. Slowly, she stepped out and held her hands up. Dengar quickly turned and saw Liara and aimed his weapon.
What'll it be, Jedi? The easy way or the hard way?
You shouldn't underestimate me.
Ooh, I'm shaking.
Liara looked at the cave opening, and before Dengar could do anything, she reached out with the force and caused it to collapse, covering the area in complete darkness. Dengar quickly fired in different directions, unable to see Liara. Liara used the dark to her advantage and activated her lightsaber, swinging at Dengar, who moved out of the way just in time. Liara tried to strike again but caught her foot on a rock in the darkness and fell forward to the cave floor.
Think fast.
Liara looked up with the glow of her lightsaber and saw Dengar swing his rifle towards her like a club as it hit her in the chest, knocking the wind out of her. Dengar swung again, but this time, Liara moved out of the way and hurled a rock directly into his face, causing him to cry out in pain, holding a large bleeding gash on his lip.
You're really starting to irritate me, girl.
Dengar aimed his rifle and unleashed a barrage of plasma fire. Liara deflected as many as she could, but was struck in the leg and rolled behind cover, whimpering in pain. Just as Dengar rounded the corner, Liara swung her saber again, just in time to slice through the barrel of his rifle. Taking advantage of Dengar's stunned state, Liara shoved him back with the force and ran to the cave entrance, cutting her way through the fallen rocks and crawling through a hole to the outside. Before she could get out, Dengar grabbed her foot and tried to pull her back inside, but Liara kicked him in the jaw and forced his grip to loosen as she escaped and ran.
Get back here, you little runt!
Liara hobbled as fast as she could back towards the beach. She had to help her master. Caseus was engaged in fierce combat with Boba, each landing rough blows to the other. As Caseus tried to kick Boba in the ribs, Boba grabbed his foot and flipped him over onto his back before releasing a set of sharp, serrated blades from his gauntlet and slashing downward. Caseus held onto Fett's arm and tried to force him off, but Boba smashed his elbow into Caseus' nose before slicing downward, leaving a deep gash on Caseus' face, stretching from his forehead down to the left side of his face. Caseus screamed in agony, and in pure desperation grabbed Boba's arm, the blades cutting into his hand, and twisted as hard as he could, snapping bones and breaking Boba's hand. The bounty hunter yelled out and slammed his metal kneecap into Caseus' chest, breaking several ribs before Caseus mustered the strength to shove Fett off with a force push. Caseus stood, warm blood pouring down his face, holding onto his ribs. Boba sent out another grapple cable at Caseus, who caught one end around his mechanical arm and flung the other end out like a whip, striking at Boba, who dodged as best as he could before Caseus ran towards him, tackling him. As they struggled, Caseus wrapped the cord around Boba's throat and tried desperately to strangle his enemy. Boba gripped his neck, coughing and sputtering, before reaching to his boot and removing a knife, plunging it deep into Caseus' leg. The pain was immense as Caseus screamed, and Fett freed himself, gasping for air, as the wounded Jedi removed the knife from his leg and tossed it aside. For a brief moment, Boba and Caseus stared at each other.
You're worth more alive, but I can make do with dead.
You won't take me alive or dead. Caseus ran at Boba as they desperately struggled and grappled with each other. Caseus tried to slam his fist into Boba's ribs, but the Mandalorian grabbed hold of his mechanical arm and snapped the hand clean off as Caseus grunted and struggled. Fett quickly headbutted Caseus, drawing blood from the Jedi's nose before kicking his broken ribs, causing Caseus extreme pain. Caseus was again face up on the ground as Fett pressed his boot against Caseus' throat, slowly crushing his windpipe. Caseus had almost nothing left, completely drained. In one final desperate move, he caught a large rock to his hand with the Force and smashed it into Boba's ankle, shattering it and causing him to fall back. Caseus rolled over on top of Fett and smashed the rock again and again into Boba's helmet, knocking it off his head. For a brief moment, Caseus saw Boba's face. A clone. He stopped attacking. In this moment, Boba reached to his gauntlet and sent a blast of fire at Caseus, the flames licking the sides of his face. Caseus rolled off, holding his face as Boba crawled on the sand towards his gun. Just as he reached it, it was pulled away from him into the waiting hands of Liara, who threw it aside.
Master!
Liara! Liara helped Caseus up as Boba struggled, trying to stand, but unable to put any weight on his shattered leg. He tried to shoot another cable wire, but he was all out. He tried every gadget, but his arsenal had been expended. Helping her master, Liara and Caseus ran to the nebulous as Boba tried desperately to pursue as best as he could. Inside the ship, Caseus' vision went blurry as he collapsed, fading out of consciousness, his damaged saber landing on the floor with a clatter. Liara hoisted her master onto the bed before running to the cockpit and igniting the thrusters as the ship flew into the air. Below, Boba reached his rifle and fired at the ship in vain as it flew out over the sea. As Boba seethed and hoisted himself to a seated position, Dengar rushed onto the beach just in time to see them make their escape.
Ah, great! You let him get away!
Boba growled under his breath and stared at the distant nebulous.
Shut up, Dengar. Get to the ship.